This video is brought to you by Clip Studio Paint. Making digital paintings is a ton of fun. I'm by no means an expert, obviously, but by now I've done a few digital paintings and there's actually quite a bit that I learned about making art digitally. And in this video, I actually want to take you through the process, but I also want to show you fundamentals when it comes to digital art making, and I will create another digital painting, which I'm super excited about. So let's go. So I think there are two main ways in which you can start a digital painting. The first one, pretty straightforward. It's basically exactly the same how you would start any painting. You start with a drawing or a sketch, and then from there you build up your painting. You add color layer by layer, and then slowly you lose your drawing, you keep adding paint on top of each other, and then slowly that way you build up your final image. The other way is quite a bit different. So no drawing whatsoever, but it's basically as if you took a brush in real life and you just started painting with color. Now, the cool thing about this approach is that you immediately force yourself to focus on the big picture. It creates a very uniform and clean looking image. The downside is you have to be a lot more cautious and careful and also present while painting, because you constantly need to check your drawing. If you get the drawing out of the way first, you save yourself fixing proportions, etc., etc. So while I do love this very painterly approach, you can basically get the same result by starting with the drawing first. At the end of the day, I guess it's a matter of personal preference. I personally like to make my life as easy as possible when it comes to making art and painting. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with a drawing. And then I'm gonna try to force myself to still paint in this very loose, artistic, painterly style. So first you have to get your drawing out of the way, and it's totally up to you how you do it, how detailed you want to have it. Are you okay with the sketch or simple outlines, or does it need to be an elaborate drawing? Doesn't matter how you do it, you just have to get it done. Actually, this is already a bit too much. I wish I didn't do this much, but yeah, whenever I start drawing, I have the tendency to keep going and keep going. But once you got your drawing finished, this is where the fun part begins, the coloring stage. Once I got the drawing out of the way, what I like to do is I like to put a layer of color underneath the drawing. So I can still see the lines, the outlines, the drawing, but I also have like a basic color composition and all the big different color blocks and color shapes in place. So I can play around with it a bit. So this would be the second layer that I'm using. And the nice thing about making digital paintings is that now nothing bad can happen to you, because, well, basically you can go back in time, you can redo things, you can recover things, you can try stuff out before you commit to something, and that makes this part so much fun. Just having the reassurance that nothing really can happen. I mean, you can't mess things up. And then what I like to do is I like to have a third layer where I put color on top of the lines, because eventually you have to paint over the lines. And with these 3 layers, I'm basically able to manipulate the paint and push it around in such a way that I still have my outlines that I can use for orientation, but I'm also free to paint over them whenever I feel like, okay, this is where I want to commit. And yeah, it's very amateurish, I have to admit, and probably not the way that most other digital artists, or actually that proper digital artists, would go about. But I mean, it works for me, and I've gotten used to this 3-layer start, I guess. And it's also super simple because for me, things need to be simple. Not many options, not too many things going on at the same time. So I'm actually also still just using one simple brush, and in this case it's the traditional gouache brush that comes with Clip Studio. Again, keeping my options limited allows me to focus on what's really important, and in this case it's obviously getting the basic structure of the painting right from the beginning. There are 2 things that I like to keep in mind during the entire process, and for me they are pretty much essential to create a digital work of art. The first one is you want to use a big brush, and you want to keep painting with the biggest brush possible for as long as possible. When I realize that I need to make some small changes or refine areas, it's only then that I switch to a smaller brush and I make smaller and smaller changes. But I also, at the same time, try to keep the mixing of the paint to a bare minimum at the beginning. So here on the left, no mixing at all. And here on the right, there is some mixing, which is great, but I try to hold off with the mixing for as long as possible as well. And the reason for that is I want to focus on what's actually important and not get caught up with mixing and blending and transitions and details. So I try to hold off for as long as possible with all of those extra things. But that's just a personal preference of mine. Luckily, Clip Studio allows you to switch around between different blending modes. So you can go from hardly any mixing to almost mixing as if you would do it in real life, basically. While mixing, Clip Studio gives you also the option between a standard. So this is basically what everyone is used to in digital painting. But then they also have something that's called perceptual mixing. And this one is much closer to how paint actually behaves in real life. It's subtle, but while mixing, as you can see, the program corrects for the brightness of the color, and you get a much more natural transition while painting. I still haven't found the right balance between realism and abstraction. Unfortunately, even I can't completely keep myself from getting caught up in the details while making digital art, just because it's so easy to do. I definitely gotta find the balance there. Unfortunately, I already sort of messed up because, I got caught up in the dangerous game of zooming in and then focusing on the details far too early. So what I'm gonna do now is actually I'm gonna back off a bit. I'm gonna zoom out as much as I feel comfortable, and I'm gonna try to focus again a bit more on the big picture. So I'm gonna use a bigger brush from here on out, stay zoomed out, and then try to continue painting at least for a while like this. So I force myself basically to not get caught up in all the small little details that aren't necessary at this point anyway. I have to admit, making digital paintings for me still is a lot of trying stuff out and a lot of pushing paint around until I find something that I'm mostly happy with. Obviously, I have much more experience in making traditional paintings, and I exactly know what's going to happen if I use this technique or this brush, but I just don't have that kind of experience when I make digital painting. But what I do have, and what everyone has basically, you don't have to stress too much, or you don't have to stress at all, because, yeah, I have to say, it feels quite liberating to not have the pressure of not messing things up. Although, I gotta say, I'm still not happy. There is so much that I have to do here. I guess wanna refine some of her armor. I do like the painterliness, but I feel like pushing the realism and having at least one element apart from like the facial features, eyes, nose, lips, that's a bit more realistic will round everything off and make it look much more natural and coherent. So I think that's what I want to focus on for the last part of the process. And there is so much more you can do. Clip Studio Paint provides you with so many different brush settings and options that you can basically create any effect you want. Whether it's mixing colors, putting paint on top of each other, creating traditional or digital effects, you can basically do anything you want. Lastly, I'm adding some details and lighting effects to really sort of drive home the whole sci-fi theme. And I gotta admit, making digital paintings is really a ton of fun, but there is one thing that I find incredibly hard, and it's, deciding when to walk away. I mean, when do you walk away from a digital painting and say, oh yeah, I can't make any improvements to this? It's so easy to do, it's so tempting, but yeah, eventually you have to call it a day. I mean, I can't keep working on this forever, so yeah, this is the point where if I walked away, I would actually be quite happy with the painting, so I think I'm gonna leave it the way it is now. It's not perfect, by no means. The process is absolute chaos and not streamlined and all over the place, I'll admit, but I'm certainly not an expert in making this, but I gotta say I kinda like the end result. So if you have never tried Clip Studio before, head over to my description, give it a shot, try it for yourself. It's really impressive. It's an incredibly powerful piece of software that basically lets you do anything you want. Whether it's drawing, painting, or animation, hardly anything you can't do with it. And they just came out with a new feature that I'm personally incredibly excited for, and it's Clip Studio Simple Mode. A beautiful, simple, minimalistic user interface for Clip Studio that lets you focus on what's important and not get distracted by any other tools, functions, settings, etc. Super exciting. I can't wait to try it for myself. Maybe something that we can get into in a future video. But for now, that's it. Another digital painting is in the books.